I'm going to be sharing with you some work that I completed a few years ago that looked at factors that affect whether a person actively engages in home visiting programs and whether they remain in home visiting programs. Research has verified what home visitors already know, that programs can only help the families that they reach. It's been found that early program withdrawal will compromise program effectiveness, since service providers have to turn their attention away from service provision and do paperwork for discharge rather than provide services. From an evaluation perspective, early withdrawal reduces the sample size and therefore reduces statistical power. When the composition of a participating group changes, it makes it hard to make comparisons within the groups. For instance, comparing at the same ethnic groups or different ethnic groups. Who leaves can affect these comparisons. And finally, attrition reduces generalizability of findings. Through my review of the research, I found that past studies had looked at overall attrition, asking what contributes to dropping out of a program. But it's only been in the past few years that researchers have started to look at two equally fundamental questions. What contributes to actively engaging in home visiting services after initial enrollment? And what contributes to remaining in a home visiting program? Past studies have primarily focused on client characteristics of the mother, and characteristics of the home visitor. But at the time that I conducted this research, there were very few studies that looked at community factors within the community that might influence whether a mother remains in a program or engages in a program. The first study that I'm going to talk about looks at community and maternal factors that contribute to engagement in home visiting services after initial enrollment. The second study looks at retention, community, home visitor, and maternal characteristics that influence whether a person stays active in a home visiting program. Mothers who have the same home visitor are not independent of each other. Whether they stay in a program or leave can be influenced by that home visitor. And a home visitor can be influenced by the county that she works in or the neighborhood, the program that she works in. This violation of independence is important when you want to examine multiple levels of influence. Today there's some advanced statistical models out there that can simultaneously estimate these independent variables that aren't truly independent. Slide. All the participants from these two studies came from the state of Oregon's Oregon Healthy Start program. It's a voluntary home visiting program modeled after HFA guidelines. Programs were individually managed at a county level. Each county had their own Healthy Start program. Families were screened using the Kemp Family Stress Inventory, and right after the child's birth, they were screened as being at risk or not at risk. And the ones that were screened as higher risk were offered weekly home visits by trained paraprofessionals. It's a paraprofessional program. The services were provided for up to 5 years, weekly home visits that gradually went down as the families progressed through the program. Before we get any further, we need to kind of define some interchangeable terms as enrollment and engagement. They're qualitatively different. For example, I've enrolled in exercise programs and health programs at the gym to be healthy and lose weight, but the evidence shows that I've never actually engaged in the program. So for the purpose of the present study, engagement was defined as agreeing to participate, enrollment was defined as agreeing to participate when the initial services were offered. Engagement, on the other hand, was participating in services beyond 3 months after enrollment. And retention, we looked at retention as active involvement beyond a significant program milestone, being 1 year. 90 days is the recommended time families be held in the Healthy Start program before discharge. It's during these first 90 days that intensive outreach efforts took place to try to get the enrolled mothers actively engaged. Home visitors would call the home, would make visits to the home, would send letters, and try to remind the mother, you've enrolled, now it's time to engage. This first study looks at the effect of community and maternal factors on engagement. Each of the 4,057 mothers in the study have been screened at risk on the Kemp Family Stress Inventory. They've been offered services. They've accepted services basically by enrolling, filling out the paperwork to enroll in the program. The community level data came from County Vital Statistics for 15 Oregon counties that were participating in the Healthy Start program. The purpose of this study was to see if community, county level factors, as well as maternal factors, influence mothers' decisions to actively engage in home visiting after initial enrollment. This illustration simply shows how mothers were nested within the 15 communities. So we have counties A through O and the mothers that were served by those counties. You can see that some counties had a lot more families than others. Some counties were well established in the Healthy Start program. There were large counties. One has 1,106 families. Another one down here only has 17. That's a county that's just starting out. They may only have 1 or 2 home visitors in their program. But the rigor of the statistical analysis that I'm going to perform and explain here considers all that in the final analysis. The first engagement question looked at whether poor community health would make it less likely for families to engage in services. Now, measures of community health, such as infant death rate, rate of low birth weight infants, have been used to reflect overall community wellness. An article in Child Development stated that the way community influences families positively or negatively can be reflected in the community's health indicators. According to this article, comparisons across large community areas on established health outcomes can be used to identify differences in family support programs. So we use poor community health as one measure. To do that, I created an index of community health based on 6 items that have been used in previous research as indicators of communities' overall health and well-being. I looked at infant death rate, the rate of low birth weight infants, attempted teen suicide rate, alcohol-related death rate, and accidental death rate. Mothers who are raising their infant in areas with good community health may see supports for healthy family conditions as common and be more likely to enroll in a home visiting program. In contrast, mothers who are raising their infants in areas of poor community health with high infant death rate, many low birth weight babies, may see these as just normal conditions and feel that these are deficits that they have to endure alone and not enroll in home visiting programs. Each of these items came from the county level vital statistics. It was averaged over 4 years and then standardized. I guess the bottom line is it came up with a 4-point range, so there's a 4-point scale of poor community health. The second engagement question looked at maternal isolation. I hypothesized that mothers that were experiencing greater maternal isolation would be less likely to engage in programs, to engage in the services beyond 90 days. I created a maternal isolation index. Part of it, the first item, the lack of lifelines, came from the Kemp Family Stress interview, where trained assessment workers assessed the presence of this global measure of isolation, looking at mothers being socially isolated from others through a lack of lifelines, and also isolated personally because of low self-esteem and depression. So that became the first item on the maternal isolation index. The next 4 items were self-report measures. The mother is single with no partner, is a sign of isolation. There's no other adults living in the home. She's living in the home with her newborn baby and no other adults in the home, is a sign of isolation. The next one is inadequate or no emergency contacts. This was self-reported by the mothers, and it was also cross-validated on the hospital intake forms, where some of these mothers who checked into the hospital to have their baby had no one to list on the emergency contact. So that would certainly be a sign of isolation. And having no telephone or cell phone. The scores on the index were 0 or 1, whether they were present or not. There were some to create maternal isolation index that ranged from 0 to 5. And I predicted that higher scores on the isolation index would predict a lack of engagement in home visiting services. I included control factors in the analysis. Past research has identified other maternal level factors that influence participation in home visiting programs. These include mother's ethnicity. There's been some research that has shown that mothers from non-dominant ethnic groups are more likely to participate in services, specifically Latina Hispanic mothers. Mothers whose infants had no health risk at birth were found to be less likely to participate in services. And the findings are mixed on how age affects participation. Some studies have found that younger mothers are more likely to participate. Some studies have found that younger mothers are more likely to drop out. Of course, marital problems, substance abuse, unstable housing, all contribute to a lack of engagement in home visiting programs. When we look at the 2 groups here, this table shows the means and standard deviations for each of the maternal factors in the study. We see that the 3,312 mothers who actually engaged scored lower on the maternal isolation index than the 745 who never engaged. It's 18.4% of the mothers never engaged in services. Although they enrolled, they never went beyond 90 days. They never actively participated. There was little difference between the 2 groups in mother's age. I have here, mother is not Latina. I guess a better word would be Hispanic. The study was done in Oregon. The mothers, there was 2 ethnic groups in the sample, really, white and Latina Hispanic mothers. There was really no other ethnic groups to speak of, less than 1%. So we could say this as mother is white. White mothers were less likely to engage in the program. Latina mothers, Hispanic mothers were more likely to engage in home visiting services. There was little differences between the infant health risk, maternal problems. The ones who never engaged had a slightly higher maternal and family problems. And there was little difference in the history of drug use and unstable housing. The fact that there's little difference in these 2 groups is because they were all screened at risk to be considered for enrollment in the program. Since the outcome had a Bernoulli distribution, whether they engaged in the program, yes or no, and the predictors came from multiple levels, I used a hierarchical generalized linear model to analyze the data. What this shows is the odds of never engaging were 1.36 times higher with every 1 point increase on the Poor Community Health Index. So if you lived in an area with poor community health, you were about 1 1/3 times more likely to never engage with each increase on the Community Health Index. The odds of never engaging were 1.3 times higher with every 1 point increase on the Maternal Isolation Index. That index ranged from 0 to 5, so a mother who didn't have a telephone was 1.39 times more likely to never engage than a mother who did have a telephone. If there was more than 1 score on the Maternal Isolation Index, the odds ratio, the odds of never engaging would increase. Mother is not Latina. In other words, mother is white. She was almost twice as likely to never engage, 1.82 times more likely to never engage for the white mothers compared to the Latina Hispanic mothers. The other variables, infant health risk, mother's age, marital and family problems, and a history of drug abuse weren't significant. percentage, but when we interpret it, what it means is a 26-year-old mother would be 40% more likely, 1.4 times more likely to remain beyond a year in the program than a 16-year-old mother. So these younger mothers are the ones that are more likely to drop out. Marital status and infant health risks were not significant. These multi-level models are sensitive to the effects of all the predictors, so I wanted to conduct a final analysis that didn't include the noise of any of the non-significant predictors, and this is what it came up with. Community violence affects whether you remain in a home visiting program, but aren't those the neighborhoods that we really want to serve, that really need to be served? But where there's violence, the likelihood of remaining in the program is less. Monthly supervision increases the likelihood that parents will remain in the program for 1 year. Latina mothers were 1.5 times, 1.48 times more likely to remain than white mothers. And mothers' age, older mothers were more likely to remain. Some strategies to increase retention: we just need to end community violence. Well, certainly that's beyond any home visiting program. But I heard mentioned today about the Triple P program and some of their mass media approaches. That could be a way that we can influence communities with infomercials, radio commercials, billboards, to target broader neighborhoods where there is violence, to make them aware that violence is not going to be tolerated. On a more individual level, families could become involved in block organizations, safe neighborhood, safe street organizations, to make our streets safe for children, make phone calls back to other parents when they see their child engaging in some type of unsafe activity. And then that could grow to the next street and the next street and maybe to the neighborhood. Rather ambitious for a home visiting program. On the provider level, supervisors, this could easily be initiated. Supervisors could provide more direct supervision and training and shadow the home visitors, not just talk to the home visitor and say, well, how was it today? Oh, that's good. But shadow the home visitors on their visits. And this type of direct supervision and training could increase retention for the mothers in the program. And on the maternal level, I think we need to intensify efforts to retain these younger mothers by adjusting to their scheduling demands. Renato mentioned that it may require evening and weekend visits, and that's something that we're going to have to do.
You can conclude, please.
Oh, well, I'll just go ahead and finish. Limitations is the generalizability, mainly white and Latino families. There's statistical limitations with only 12 sites. 12 and 15 sites, I was only able to use one community level predictor. More research is certainly needed to examine these micro and macro level influences, and a need for more theory-driven research, and that's happening as we speak. More theories are coming out on this topic. And finally, how these two studies add to the knowledge base. They were some of the first studies to use these multi-level analysis techniques. These programs are out there, and they really should be applied to home visiting programs. They're some of the first studies of participation in home visiting programs to include community factors, and we have to look at the community. We can't just look at the individual, because the individual is part of a family, that's part of a neighborhood, that's part of a community, and part of a broader macro system. And this was one of the first studies to look specifically at engagement separate from retention. And I think enrollment, engagement, retention are separate things that need to be examined. Thank you.